Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. This is Kelly Beatty coming to you live from the Chelmsford Senior Center for Night 2 of the Spring Town Meeting for 2019. It is a cold and dreary night outside, not nearly as spring-like as we would like it to be this time of year. So maybe it's just as well that we're all inside, keeping nice and dry as we warm up to some of the remaining warrant articles. We got through quite a bit last Monday night. We got through the town budget, which totaled roughly $125 million, right? $61 million each for the town municipal function and the school department, and also $3.5 million for the capital improvement budget. So tonight we have only seven articles remaining to get through. And some of those are going to, I think, go pretty quickly. Things like street acceptances, which is Article 27, the last one, typically go very quickly. But it's the first two that I suspect will take the most time. One of them, Article 10, has to do with zoning bylaw amendment involving drive-through restaurants along Route 129. You might recall this is the new mixed-use overlay that the town meeting reps approved a couple of meetings ago with an eye toward economic development. And if any of you have driven 129 at any time in the last 20 years, you know that with all those big office buildings, it is something of a wasteland when it comes to places to eat. So one of the hopes of the town economic development team is to bring restaurants into that area, and this is an intent to allow fast food purchases between 5:30 and 10 o'clock. And it's not like a McDonald's, it's higher scale than that, maybe think Chili's or something like that. The other article that's going to be dealt with right off the bat is a special town meeting article involving something called a pilot, a pay in lieu of taxes for a company that wants to install solar panels and turn the income from that over to the town in lieu of paying taxes. It's a new concept. It will be explained in some detail. In a sense, this will be a pilot for this pilot. I want to remind you all that last Monday night we had no electronic voting because there was an equipment glitch, literally a computer upgrade that hadn't been fully thought through. Tonight they seem to be working just fine, so we expect to have all of the electronic voting done correctly, which is a good thing because that Article 10 that I mentioned involving the zoning bylaw and the fast food requires a 2/3 vote, and it might be close. So I'm sure you're going to see a lot of discussion about that. So please stay tuned for this night number 2. If we don't get through this in one night, we'll resume next Monday night. All of us here are pretty confident that we will get through tonight. So stay tuned and pull up a chair, a beverage of your choice, and get comfortable. Thanks.
Okay. Tricia? What? Why do you do it that way?
Because it just here's the mic.
Oh.
Just so I didn't do it that time. Just so you don't have to do it.
No, I moved it. I did it. I didn't realize you did it that way, so I always pulled it out. Okay, that's great. I'll remember that, maybe. Remind me in 6 months because I'm going to forget. I do. I normally look at that.
Next time I won't put it in. This is my original, so I have to.
Good evening. It's 7:25, and we're going to be starting our special town meeting. Would you kindly join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we're going to go to the single article on the special town meeting, and then we will immediately move on to Article 10. Yes.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Cohen, I'm town manager. We have a one-article special town meeting for an issue that arose following the signing of the warrant for the spring annual town meeting. This pertains to a tax agreement for a proposed solar facility that would be constructed on Watton Lane. And I'll now turn the podium over to Frank Green, the chief assessor.
Thank you, Paul. Tonight's discussion is about a potential pilot agreement between the town and 100 Wooten Solar SoCap LLC. Clean Footprint is an owner-developer of solar arrays. They approached us regarding a project they would like to construct out on Wooten Street. Wooten Street is a 12.5-acre parcel improved with a 100-year-old industrial building. It's had the continuous ownership since 1983, and the size of the building is roughly 97,000 square feet. The building is kind of the lot is wrapped around by the Lighthouse School, kind of an L-shaped, and then behind that is the Williamsburg condominium complex. This next slide shows kind of how the array would be, kind of wrapping around the parcel butting up to the property line. The proposal is for a 720 metered ground-mounted solar facility. The stated project valuation or cost is roughly $652,000. Chapter 59, Section 38H of the Mass General Laws has alternatives to assessing these kinds of plants. So the first one is the normal assessing valuation, personal property, and I would assess it as I would any other project. The next one is a voluntary tax agreement unique to this type of property. It's based on a good faith negotiation and is the equivalent of assessing the full and fair cash value. This is not a tax break. There is no tax break realized for this project. It's a 20-year agreement. Any additional equipment that would be added to it over that time span would be added to the valuation. Some of the tax advantages that have been associated with this project is the determined and predictable, stable manner that the valuations are arrived at. An agreement, the likelihood of an appeal on these is lessened by the fact that there's an agreement. And the town is protected in the event that this facility should become exempt by the legislature in the future, although the last two items are not particularly likely. I want to make a distinction between a typical pilot program and this kind of tax agreement. A pilot is typically an agreement entered into by the town with an otherwise exempt entity. It's with an escalator, and it falls outside of Prop 2.5, so it's not part of the levy, it's not part of new growth. This kind of tax agreement is different in that it would be considered new growth, and it is part of the tax rating setting process. The distinction is that this is a 20-year agreement, a kind of predictable assessment and tax amount that would be agreeable to both sides. What I'm seeking tonight is the authority, along with for myself and the selectmen, to try to negotiate a fair evaluation for this property. I'll take any questions.
Well, before that, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation on this article?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 1.
And does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval 5-0.
Now is the time for questions or discussion.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. Can you tell us something about the background of the company that we'd like to give a 20-year I guess it's a frozen tax rate to them?
It would be a frozen tax rate, there would be an escalator, and be part of a negotiation. So a certain percentage would make a reasonable assumption of the tax rate, easy enough for fiscal '20. Moving forward, we would have an escalator for the tax rate. In terms of the firm, they're from Florida. They have maybe half a dozen or more that I'm aware of agreements in town, mostly in the western part of the state.
And when was this LLC established?
I don't know.
Okay. And you said they're in Florida, not in
They're based in
Chelmsford.
Florida.
Okay. Corporation is from where?
Florida,
The corporation is established in Florida?
I believe so.
Okay. And do they have a footprint in Chelmsford already?
They do not.
They don't. Okay. Question from a tax point of view, do residents like me, do we have the ability to do something similar for this 20 years that?
No.
What would it be effective to someone starting a business in our town if we did this for everybody that came into town?
What would be the effect?
What's the effect? You said it's not a tax break.
It's not
but
a
it
tax
allows them to establish exactly what their rate will be for the next 20 years?
That's right. The tax rate would be set, there'll be an escalator, 2.5% escalator, or whatever we negotiate for the tax rate looking forward for the next 20 years.
Okay, so
The impact in terms of, the first year and every year would count as any other valuation. So the first initial year would be new growth. Every other year would be part of the levy, just like it was a project of any other kind. It's part of the levy, part of the tax rate setting process.
so it'd be $600,000 more or less,
Unless they...
2.5% next year, 2.5% the next year, all the way up to 20.
Right, it's the assessed value. So the initial cost is roughly $652,000. That's what's been cited. Depending on the equipment that they introduce to us as we continue to negotiate and find out more about that equipment, whether there'll be additional converters or racking or panels, and then that value could go up.
And the value of those items, let's say they just stick it in and it's done for 20 years, would decline over those 20 years?
Yes.
As an assessment? Okay. Not like my house that goes up every year, based on market value and all that.
No, their depreciation on these items are fairly accelerated. They degrade pretty quickly. The power they yield each and every year is actually less.
Okay. Do we know how many employees this thing has associated to Chelmsford with this?
There'll be no employees associated with this.
So we don't get any employees, we just get some solar power?
That's correct.
And a fixed rate, 2.5% every year for 20 years.
Thank you.
Phil Samway, Precinct 7. A quick question. This property has a right-of-way on it, which is
Sorry?
a property has a right-of-way which connects to Southwell. Will they be maintaining that road?
This particular facility will wrap around the backside and not quite touch that area. I don't think anything will be interrupted with access to Southwell.
Who's going to pay for the road? Does the town pay for that, or does the company pay for that?
This project went before the Planning Board and Conservation Commission. Part of the requirement by the Planning Board is that the company's responsible to remain the right-of-way towards the solar. If you go down to the end of Watton Street, you see that big brick building that's been there since forever. As you head towards the softball fields, what they're basically doing is working in that floodplain area to anchor these solar panels. As Frank explained, the value of the whole project is essentially less than many houses in town. It's about $700,000, as Frank explained. And then the reason that this is done, saying, well, why is this thing exist? The state passed legislation a few years back to allow this as a means to support the solar industry, because many of these projects, even though they're constructed by an LLC out of Florida, once they get approval, they often get sold. And as part of the investment strategy to support solar, this becomes part of the fixed cost of investment and investment return. So that's the benefit of why the applicant seeks the agreement. And again, the town seeks on the other side, because it then gives you the stability in the tax assessment and tax revenue from the project without going through an appeal process potentially to the state over the various value of what solar is. So again, this is part of the state carve-out in order to support the solar industry.
The question I actually had was, The road itself is in pretty poor...
It's not on, it's off of Watton Street. It's not, the road that they're maintaining, again, is their property. They're not responsible for maintaining Watton Street or the pathway down to Southwell Field, but they do have to maintain the easement that's approved for this project, which wraps around the back side of the building, which is the riverside.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Chris Bowman, Precinct 4. Were any Massachusetts solar companies investigated or approached for this type of investment?
This is not municipal property. This is private property. The private property owner came forward with an application to the community through the Planning Board and Conservation. So therefore, the town has no say in who the developer is or where they come. They just apply for a permit.
Okay, so the private property owner is the individual who lives in Vero Beach, Florida, then?
Right, the property
correct?
that's where the company is based out of. The property owner at Watton Street has been the owner of that property for well over a generation. The property
Okay.
is not sold. They're just taking advantage of underutilized land that's in a floodplain to develop solar.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. Not a question, Mr. Moderator. You can start the clock. I looked on the internet today, and there are, this gentleman created 10 different corporations out of his house on a golf course in Vero Beach, Florida. 4 of them in 2019, including this one. So he created an LLC, a foreign LLC, according to the office in Massachusetts that looks at corporations. The interesting thing to me was the personal home on the golf course in Vero Beach has no solar panels on it. He did establish a corporation in Massachusetts 2 months ago, and he did establish this corporation, according to the documentation on the internet, in Delaware 10 months ago. And he's asking Chelmsford to make an agreement for 20 years with us on a corporation established in Massachusetts 2 months ago. I think we need to do a little more homework on the gentleman than I was able to pull up. There's renewables, there's POTUS Partners, there's renewables, Sea Oak Asset. All these things were established in the last couple of years, 10 different corporations, limited liability corporations between 2017 and 2018, both in land development and solar. So it's an opportunity for the developers certainly to come and run around and do some of these things. But I think 2 months is probably not enough time to set a corporation and allow the town to fix a tax rate for a corporation for the next 20 years. We don't plan that far. We only plan for the next couple of years. And if you don't treat my house and my neighborhood and my companies that are moving into our town like this, where you fly into town and you get a 20-year frozen tax rate, then I don't think we ought to establish that for somebody that's only been in business in Massachusetts in this corporation, foreign limited liability corporation established only 2 months ago. I don't think we ought to say yes to that. They can come back in the fall and challenge me on this, but I think 2 months is not something to allow for 20 years for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Doug Bruce, Precinct 9. The previous speaker left me a little confused, so I'd just like to seek some clarification. All we're doing here tonight is just voting to give the assessor's office authorization to negotiate. We're not agreeing or disagreeing to the actual deal. We're just giving you authorization to negotiate. Is that correct?
Along with the selectmen, that's correct.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Badri Uppiyappan, Precinct 5. Is that authorization also include the execution of the contract, or the execution of the contract comes back later on?
No, it's the execution.
It's the execution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Regazio, Precinct 7. Is it my understanding that the initial assessment will be somewhere around the original cost of the equipment, $600,000 plus or minus?
That's
And
right.
and that assessment will go down 2-3%?
First, we have to establish the equipment that's being in there. This is the estimate that's been forwarded to me at the moment. But once we get the actual inventory that's there, then I'll have a sense of the cost.
Okay, and then the assessment will be reduced by a depreciation
It will
rate?
depreciate.
But the tax rate will be
There'll be an
fixed?
escalator, depending on how we negotiate it, there'll be an escalator making assumptions on the tax rate.
Okay, so that as the equipment value goes down and supposedly the tax rate goes up, it'll be
There are other
somewhere-
factors that play into this, and that is tax policy. We have a split tax rate along with a small commercial exemption. So with the split tax rate, there are variables in there with the personal property tax rate might be looking forward, but all things being equal, there'll still be an escalator, 2.5% escalator, and then adjusted to the tax rate.
Well, does the commercial, I mean, the different commercial rate, will that affect this project, or that'll be thrown out? It'll just be the 2.5% increase if that's the percentage that's agreed to?
The basis will still be the commercial tax rate or the personal property tax rate, to be exact.
Okay, but the rate will be fixed at the beginning and
And
then
then
a
an
maximum
escalator.
increase of whatever the COLA is. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? There being none, we will now vote. A yes vote is to authorize the Board of Assessors and the Board of Selectmen to enter into this possible agreement with a solar panel provider.
And while that vote's being taken, I want to remind you that if you're watching this from home and you can't quite read the panels of the various PowerPoints that you see, you can always go to live.chelmsfordtv.org, and you can display those on your computer in crisp Technicolor.
The article passes, 114 in favor, 11 opposed, no abstentions, and now we will return to the town meeting that was adjourned from Monday. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The next article for consideration is Article 10. This is the sole zoning or any general bylaw article on the warrant. This pertains to an amendment to the Route 129 zoning district, and I'm going to turn the podium over to Evan Belansky, our Community Development Director, to make the presentation.
Good evening. I'm just going to provide a brief introduction on Article 10 and continuation of Route 129, state of Route 129, following my Monday night marketing and branding updates. So we continue to receive valuable information from the Site Readiness Grant. That program will provide a master plan study for the Chelmsford Crossroads at Route 129. New businesses are continuing to move into Chelmsford, but we are not gaining enough ground, and further businesses are still vacating. Medium-sized, small-sized businesses are still leaving 129. The business market is demanding properties with modernized, convenient amenities as a means to attract and retain workforce in today's very competitive environment and need for highly skilled labor. We continue to experience higher than average vacancy rates for business properties in Chelmsford compared to our community neighbors and in the region. We are presenting a change that we believe will be the catalyst to re-image the crossroads at Route 129. Looking to move forward from the reputation of a 40-year-old office park from the 1980s and provide this 600-acre office park with the ability to compete in today's demanding market. If we are able to meet the demands or exceed the known demands of business market for real estate, our chances of success are much greater. The Chelmsford Crossroads at Route 29 requires immediate action to become competitive in filling up the many empty buildings that we have and to become known as the next emerging leader in creating and recruiting businesses and jobs to the area.
Thank you and good evening. So I'm going to just provide some additional context. So this effort for 129 began about 6 years ago. Back in 2013 was the initial zoning effort. Unfortunately, that did not move forward. That was quickly followed up by the first wake-up call to the community with the departure of Kronos and Mercury departing in 2015. Town meeting responded and chose to compete with the approval of the Route 129 Business Amenity Overlay District in October of 2016. Since then, town officials have been actively engaged with many property owners and commercial brokers. During those meetings, we continuously asked property owners to pursue the opportunities that town meeting provided within the overlay. More recently, the first two projects within the overlay were approved. Those were 104 Turnpike Road and 197 Billerica Road. There was a multifamily project as well as a restaurant and retail project that were approved. 197 Billerica Road has had some challenges finding an anchor tenant for the 200-seat restaurant. More recently, Analog Devices as well as Cadence have both announced their departure from the Route 129 area within a year. Analog occupies over 200,000 square feet within the Route 129 area. More recently, based upon market interest, back in October of 2018, this body rezoned 1 acre at 278-282 Mill Road to permit business amenities. This was followed up with a meeting in November with the property owner of 330 Billerica Road. They expressed their initial interest in their vision for their property. The EDC met with the proponent at 330 Billerica Road in December. That was followed up with an update to the Planning Board in January. In February, the Planning Board held their required public hearings. That was followed up by FinCom in March and Board of Selectmen in April. So the proponents of 330 Billerica Road presented a narrative, conceptual floor plans, and conceptual architectural plans to the EDC. Those were presented to the Planning Board and have been presented so on throughout this process. The project narrative, which has been handed out at the front of the room, indicates that the property owner has done some self-directed due diligence based upon determining local market demand. Based upon that information, they came to us with this proposal. This proposal includes transformation of 330 Billerica Road, which was the former Comcast facility. This is an 80,000 square foot building located at the gateway to the Route 129 area. What is in front of you this evening is a request to allow a drive-through component associated with this transformation of this particular property. What they have indicated to us and what we believe would occur is that the fast casual would be a catalyst for additional investments. All the other improvements on the property, as you see on the plan, including the 2 quick service restaurants, a full sit-down restaurant, and a retail component, those are all currently permitted via the overlay adopted 2.5 years ago. The proponent has indicated this total investment would be upwards of over $10 million. The 6 bullets on this slide were presented to the Planning Board during their deliberations. The strategy 2.5 years ago and moving forward with 129 continues to seek economic drivers. The Route 129 area, as I mentioned, as we meet with stakeholders, we continue to learn information from those stakeholders, and what we learn changes and evolves very rapidly based upon market conditions. So what was approved 2.5 years ago was a starting point. As I mentioned, there were lots of assumptions, desires, and hopes related to the original adoption back in 2006, particularly related to why drive-throughs related to food establishments were not permitted. Since then, as I mentioned, we continue to learn more about what the market is demanding, what businesses are demanding, and what makes a vibrant and economically viable office park. The proposed zoning is a sound planning, economic development, and regulatory strategy, one that the Planning Board has determined would not be detrimental to the original vision, but would also create value and be consistent with the vision. In summary, as it relates to now and moving forward. We're 8 years into a robust real estate cycle. Unfortunately, the Route 129 area has not seen much improvement. In other words, we could be characterized as treading water. There should be cause for concern as it relates to potential negative impacts and those continuing trends if they continue as they currently have been. Ultimately, town meeting needs to decide once again what is its commitment to Route 129 and the 45% CIP, commercial, industrial, and personal property tax that it represents. The Route 129 area is literally and figuratively at a crossroads. It's fighting for its economic relevancy. So more specifically related to the article that's in front of you, upscale fast casual is a fairly new concept to Massachusetts. It's more predominant in the Boston area. Some examples that you're likely familiar with in the current marketplace are Chipotle, Starbucks, and Panera. Others that you may be familiar with in other parts of Massachusetts and the Northeast are Jimmy John's, Five Guys, Shake Shack, Potbelly Sandwiches, Be Good, Tasty Burger, and Sweet Green. This concept straddles between traditional fast food as you know it, as well as casual dining. It focuses on a higher quality, made-to-order food, more upscale environment with an open kitchen. In summary, it's a place where people want to be, where they want to congregate, and where they want to socialize. So as I mentioned, the overlay already permits restaurants of all types and styles, including fast food, casual, sit-down counter service. The piece that it does not currently allow is a drive-through component. So the zoning strategy to allow drive-throughs related to upscale fast casual is to ensure high-quality establishments. That will be done with a multi-pronged criteria related to location, design, and operations. Those are the A through I criteria within the zoning text. The zoning strategy emphasizes the sit-down restaurant component as the primary component, with the drive-through being an accessory component.
1 minute.
Regulatorily, it requires a special permit from the planning board, and it does provide flexibility on a case-by-case basis. This slide provides visual examples. The bottom right are the examples that the zoning strategy is prohibiting, and the rest of the slides are the high-quality, upscale, fast casual that the overlay is encouraging. Final slide, the top image is the previously approved commercial exclusion zone along Mill Road and Turnpike Road. That remains in place. No commercial amenities, including drive-throughs of any kind, are allowed along Mill Road and Turnpike Road within this red area. And on the bottom image are the properties that are highlighted as defined in the text of the zoning overlay along Billerica Road and Mill Road. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 10.
Board of Selectmen.
The Board of Selectmen recommends approval 4-1.
Okay, we have two amendments. Oh, Planning Board, I'm sorry. Nobody was up there from the Planning Board, so I...
Yep, upon conducting a duly advertised public hearing on February 13th, 2019, the Planning Board voted to recommend Article 10 with a 6-1 vote. Nancy Arroway was against it.
Thank you. So we have two amendments, and I will take them in the order in which they were submitted. Mr. LaValle, are you here? Would you please explain and introduce your amendment?
Christopher LaValle, Precinct 4. The amendment I'm introducing today would strike the words at the bottom of the amendment that allow the board to waive any provision where it deems necessary. So I'd be striking the words, the board may waive any provision, A through I, where it determines that the project will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the bylaw. So first I want to mention that whether you agree with the drive-through concept or not, you have to admit that the planning board and the community development office were really thinking outside the box when they were proposing this. They have introduced something that they think is necessary and they think is going to improve the area. However, the key to this article is the conditions that would specifically exclude regular drive-through places like McDonald's and Burger King. And the wording that allows the board to strike any or all of those key provisions, to me, would be detrimental to the article intent and concept. So that's what I'm proposing, to strike that, so we keep the restrictions and the high-level proposal.
Thank you. So now we are going to be discussing the amendment, and that's all we're going to be discussing.
Ed Buckley, Precinct 6. I have a question. Instead of drive-throughs, has any thought been given to park-up takeouts, like many restaurants in the area?
So as I mentioned, all kinds of restaurants are permitted down there. So any restaurant that wanted to open down there could do takeout, could do counter service.
But instead of the drive-through, they designate spots, 7, 8 spots where people can drive up and get their own takeout.
I understand what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, this concept is one that that particular property owner has identified. They've identified that as being a key to their property and their transformation of their property. They've indicated that very clearly to us. They've also indicated that they have a real-world tenant that they've entered into lease negotiations with. So the question for town meeting is, again, how committed are you to the timely implementation of revitalization of the Route 129 area? That's what's being presented to you this evening.
I have another question. What's our commercial vacancy rate as compared to maybe Borica or Tewksbury?
So for the Route 129 area, it's 16%. That's higher than the greater Lowell area.
Yeah.
That 16% is higher than it was 2.5 years ago.
And how much tax revenue in the past year have we lost out on in the 129 corridor and the River Neck Road properties? You got an estimate on that?
How much have we lost?
Lost in the past fiscal year.
Well, we haven't lost any tax revenue. The taxes continue to get paid on those properties.
Okay. And in the 5 years since the CIOD passed, how many new companies have come into the 129 corridor?
Using the overlay?
Yeah.
Well, there's no traditional businesses that need to use the overlay. So the projects that I mentioned, the new development projects that I mentioned, are the ones that have used the overlay.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one question for the speaker. If a place like an Outback or 99 that does have the drive-up park takeout service wanted to do a slight change of their business model and do a drive-through, in the current environment, would they be able to locate within that zone?
Yeah, so there's nothing prohibiting any restaurant in the town of Chelmsford, located anywhere, to have a pickup window. What defines a drive-through is with a menu board, where the transaction is taking place, the ordering is taking place, as part of that drive aisle, the menu board, and the drive-through pickup window.
So if an Outback or 99 that already has a slight drive-up model wanted to slightly change their business model and do a drive-up in addition to those other services.
Correct. Under that scenario, they would not be ordering on site. They would be pre-ordering online application, something of that nature. That currently exists right now. The model that's in Chelmsford is dedicated spots within the parking lot. But you are correct. There are national models where those same entities are pursuing basically a pickup window where you order beforehand.
So this new article would allow them to also do a drive-through type of model as well?
That option's already permitted. That's not defined as a traditional drive-through in Chelmsford zoning.
But I mean with the menu board and...
This article would specifically allow the traditional menu board. You order on site. Correct.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. I have a tendency to want to support the amendment. I want to ask, why was that last section in there, which sounds a lot like the Board of Selectmen and others can eliminate most or any of these criteria?
Thank you. I appreciate the question based upon the amendment. So all of the recent zoning that town meetings approved, primarily the 2 overlays, have emphasized flexibility on a case-by-case basis based upon a determination from the planning board within a special permit process. The reason for that flexibility is that Chelmsford is not in the position of having choices within the marketplace. Projects that are coming to Chelmsford are on a very limited case-by-case basis based upon very unique circumstances. So the purpose of the flexibility is to allow proponents who have an idea to get in front of the planning board to state their case. Without the waiver provision, without the flexibility, there would be many, many opportunities that would never get into the public realm for a discussion. The waiver provision is key to allow that opportunity rather than town staff saying, no, the bylaw says you can't do that, and the conversation is over.
Would it make sense for town meeting to interpret what you've just said as any and all conditions that are currently listed there can be removed and still invite somebody in? I know what you said sounded like limited, very carefully limited, but the wording doesn't say that.
As drafted, the discretion given to the planning board is to provide flexibility on a case-by-case example. So while the planning board may be very unwilling to grant a waiver for a freestanding restaurant, there may be a scenario where someone comes in and they're an end cap unit and their business model doesn't include 50 seats or 3,500 square feet. That's flexibility on a case-by-case basis. The point with the waiver provision is if the planning board and the community are interested, but you have very restrictive or rigid standards, you have to say no. There's no opportunity for a discussion, for a negotiation. This waiver provision allows that flexibility with the elected planning board within a special permit process. If they want to say no, they can say no. If they want to work with a proponent, with a developer, and try to figure out something that's a win-win and a good balance, this allows them to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Henry Parley, Precinct 7, Planning Board member. I can't stress what Evan just said enough. It gives us flexibility to take and hear somebody. Basically, if we don't have that ability to even listen to them, if they can't take and do all this, the A through I, that's where we're at. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, Paul Regazio at Precinct 7. You indicate that you have a prospect that wants to come into that building. Does that prospect require elimination of any of these requirements?
No, that was discussed at the EDC meeting back in November, and we were pleasantly surprised that the property owner at 330 Billerica Road indicated that the tenant that they're negotiating a lease with would comply with all of these standards.
Thank you.
Brian Lieutenant, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, you showed a map of the overlay district, the 65-acre overlay district, and there were some circles around, if you could bring that up, there were some circles around different areas in that bottom picture. It's a little bit hard to see there. How many locations, based on that picture, could have I'm going to call it a fast food restaurant because that's the language that you have on the warrant article, could have a fast food with drive-through restaurant?
So just estimating the properties along Billerica Road and a little portion of Mill Road is probably 20 properties out of 70.
So we could have 20 properties there. And with the amendment, we're just talking about the amendment, but we've gone way far in both directions on that and talked a little bit deeper. So
Well, I figured that the discussion would come up one way or the other, so.
Right. Okay. So beyond the amendment, if we don't limit the planning board to this, is it possible that the document here the limits are those 20 locations, and they could waive one of those and put one up above that or below that, or?
No, the waivers are not related to location, primarily because of the overlay map that's on the screen in front of you.
Okay.
We're not amending the overlay map.
That's not in the control and under the purview of the planning board. They can only use those locations that are on that lower map there for drive-throughs.
Correct.
And could they put more than one drive-through on any one of those properties?
No, one of the citing criteria is no more than one per property.
Okay, and again, could the planning board waive that provision as the language here if we don't approve this amendment? They may waive any provisions where it determines that the project will be consistent with the purpose and intent, it's a little bit small, of the bylaw. It says it could waive any provision. That's not a provision?
Yes, A through I are the provisions that could be waived.
These only on this sheet? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So the size could change. We could put a kiosk-y kind of thing like a McDonald's or Burger King. If the economy gets really bad and we want one.
I mean, again, it's consistent with the goals and objectives. So the primary goal and objective of the overlay with 129 is to create high-value redevelopment.
Okay. And you used a term, self-directed due diligence. Did the town do a traffic study if we put 20 drive-throughs on here, what the effect would be on Golden Cove, Turnpike, and/or the Route 129 entrance and exit going north and southbound on Route 3? Did we do any traffic change due diligence?
No, but there wouldn't be 20. Never will be 20.
No, you said there would be, but.
No, you asked me how many properties are eligible.
Could be.
Could be, right.
Okay, maximum. Let's say there's one and it's a Dunkin' Donuts. Is it possible that we've done town due diligence and done a traffic study of how many cars might come off Route 3, circle through, grab their coffee?
We have not done any specific studies. That would be done as part of the planning board process, just like any other zoning amendment.
Okay. And I'm assuming the planning board, listening to at least one member, does not approve of their ability not to waive these. And that sounds like that's probably the whole planning board would like the complete control of that whole area. Is that, if we don't pass this amendment, that's what would happen?
Hold on, please. The planning board did not weigh in on the amendment.
Okay.
The vote was on the original article.
Okay.
They did not have an opportunity to meet.
Just one member mentioned that they want to control that then.
That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julia Novak-Caldwell, Precinct 8. Precinct 8, Julia Caldwell. So this particular, what we're discussing now is for one developer to go in and do one drive-through component. That's really what we're voting on right now, correct?
No, you're voting on an opportunity for the entire district.
Opportunity for the entire district.
The compelling public interest and why this is in front of you is primarily related to a particular property and proponent and vision, which we view as a catalyst for what town meeting adopted 2.5 years ago, the goals and objectives.
Okay, thank you. And just a comment, I know that there are equivalent drive-throughs in Billerica, such as Panera and Starbucks, and just something that maybe other folks might not think of frequently that don't have small kids or families. This is really an important amenity that a lot of people drive to Billerica for, including myself and a lot of other families. Not getting your kids out of the car, wouldn't we want to keep all that business, those Chelmsford families and people in the area in Chelmsford, by having a business model like this available in the community? I think it would be a great way to, again, keep business within our community instead of having all those folks drive out to a different community to bestow their business upon other franchises. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beth Logan, Lovett Lane. Regarding the amendment, I believe that the speaker at the podium said that if somebody came before them that didn't meet all those criteria, they'd have to turn them away. My question is, can't you just do a bylaw change and bring it to town meeting and allow town reps to consider it?
You mean like require...
Like you're doing right now?
Require a specific project to come in front of the town meeting on a project-by-project basis. You could do that. That would be very unfriendly, very cumbersome. The whole point of the overlays is to be as business-friendly as possible, understanding the economic realities of 129. There is no market pressure. Now, 2.5 years later, after adoption...
Wait a minute, excuse me. I asked a question, and I think the speaker may be more than the question. My question was just, can they come before here?
And what he's explaining is that...
I know what he was explaining. I'm just saying, I think my question's been answered.
Oh, well, if you think
Okay.
it's been answered,
Yeah.
you're satisfied with the answer, that's
So they
fine.
can come before here, and my final comment to this is that I'm going to disagree with what everybody else says, and if we continue to see the kind of backups onto Main Street like we do at Drum Hill and on 110 where the Dunkin' Donuts is, then I think the town reps should have a voice to say, no, we don't want another one, or we don't want one there. It's causing problems. And so I understand there are people who have reasons to go to drive-thrus, but I think that the town reps should have some say in how we can't even drive. We can't get to work because of some of these backups, and I think it should be something that we have a voice with.
Ms. Logan, I think that you'll see the next amendment may address your concern.
You can start the clock. We're in a position right now that, having supported the overlay on Route 129, that we want to bring businesses in. We want to provide amenities that are suitable for the people that work there, the people that live in town. We meet every 6 months. If somebody wants to start a business in this particular area and there's a good business plan, and I'll be honest with you, I do trust the planning board to be very careful about what they approve and what they would allow to have happen. You know, people wonder about drive-thrus, and we have a drive-thru down on Route 110. It's called Dunkin' Donuts. And sometimes I go in there and there's a pile of cars ahead of me, but I've never seen it spill into the street because they're up there to get what they ordered, get out of there, and the next car shows up. You know, this parking area around some of these buildings is more than sufficient to pull the cars off the street and run them through the drive-through. I think if this is an opportunity to give the planning board flexibility to see that it's appropriately instituted, that we should do that. I'm going to vote against the amendment because I think it's, to be honest with you, too restrictive. It doesn't allow for any flexibility. I certainly would like to think about limiting the number of facilities that we could have this in. We don't want, it'll never be 20, but those are arguments that are made in order to get you to start being worried and fear of putting in 1 or 2. No, what if there are 20? Probably not in 200 years. So I'm going to vote against the amendment and give the planning board and the people that are associated with negotiating this the ability to do something that's good for the town, to put in a facility that will allow us 50 seats. There's a fair amount of seats to begin with inside, to have inside service, outside service, drive-through service, give those people that work in that area a little bit more flexibility on where they go to lunch, how they have lunch, how they might have dinner. I don't know what this facility is going to be that they're suggesting in here, but I suspect they'll be very careful about making sure it's a nice facility. So I'm going to vote against the amendment. I hope you do too, to provide the flexibility to bring something in a timely fashion that meets the criteria of the planning board for a good location, a good facility, something that will add to the town, and not look at it in a negative sense that it's going to be taking away from us, but giving the benefit to people that will probably bring in more industry in that particular area of town. And if I'm not mistaken, if they're in Chelmsford and they're buying food, there's a tax on that food. Am I correct in that? Yes, there's a nod from the front of the room. So it's not just the property taxes or the increase in value of the property, but if it's a good growing business, we're going to get taxes from the purchases there, and that also helps the town. So I ask you to vote against the amendment, remove whatever restrictions it might apply, and continue on to have this successfully passed. Thank you.
Thank you.
George Zarros, Precinct 3. I'm going to agree with the previous speaker. I think that the planning board's very sensitive, and more so sensitive, about drive-through windows. In the past, it's come before the planning board, and every time it comes, it's getting more and more sensitive. To handcuff the planning board and say they have to meet all these, every single one of these, it's going to be very difficult to meet all those. But it does give the planning board some flexibility to negotiate. If someone came in and wanted to waive all of them, I'm pretty sure the planning board would say, why don't you go back and try to rework it. So put your faith in the planning board. They are elected officials. You can vote for them. If you don't like what they're doing, you can vote for them coming every April. So I would urge you to vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott Davidson, Precinct 3. I understand your point with having the flexibility, and that's why that line is in there. Just going on the other side, my question is, what's the point of having all of those provisions if there's just a line at the bottom that says you can ignore them?
So the reason there's A through I is that the whole zoning strategy is to aim for high-quality food establishments that focus on the dining experience, not the drive-through experience. That's why the visuals show that those siting criteria won't result in a photomat kind of drive-through only food establishment. We want the restaurant component. That's the value added. That's what vibrant office parks have within them, is places where people want to congregate and socialize. That's why those criteria exist.
Thank you. You can start the clock. I'd like to debate. I fully support this amendment. I think this is a well-crafted article having those 9 provisions. I like those 9 provisions, and I think it's good that it's a little bit restrictive. To a couple of the previous speakers' points, I agree that town meeting should be able to weigh in. I don't think it should be just left up to the planning board. I think town meeting should be able to weigh in. To the other previous speaker who said if you have a good business plan, you don't want to have to wait 6 months for town meeting. Well, there's already somebody that came forward with a business plan back in December. They're already waiting 6 months. If they need to get a waiver on a provision, they can wait another 6 months for the entire town meeting reps to meet and discuss it and talk about it and figure out what the best thing to do is. So I fully support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kayla Rennie, Precinct 3. I live at C37 Scotty Hollow Drive. I have a question regarding the amendment. So if the amendment were to pass, it's my understanding that the planning board would no longer have control over any of the provisions A through I. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. It's the planning board who makes the determination as to whether to or not to waive those provisions. And again, that's within a special permit process, which allows the planning board full legal discretion within the context of the legal framework of the zoning provision.
So, sorry, my understanding is that if this amendment passes, then the board is not allowed to waive any of those provisions. Is that?
If the amendment passes, correct.
If the amendment passes, okay. So my question is, if the amendment fails, then the planning board would have the ability to reevaluate any proposed business that would go in there, say if they have 45 interior seats instead of 50. And through those negotiations, if there is some proposed business to go in there, what would be is there any way for the public to know, in planning board minutes or something, that these discussions are going on, or is this something where we would find out about it once it's finalized?
Sure. So all planning board agendas are posted. They're public meetings. All public hearings, of which any special permit would be a public hearing. All abutters within 300 feet are notified. There's public testimony. All planning board meetings are televised live and rebroadcast via telemedia. And as many of the recent development projects, particularly along and within 129, there's a lot of community attention and media attention.
Okay. Can I start the clock? Thank you. I just want to say that I will be voting against the amendment. I think that our planning board representatives are elected, as many of our previous speakers had mentioned. I think the fact that they are elected, shows the faith in our community, in our planning board members to make the right decisions for our community. I think that the way that these provisions have been laid out have been very well thought through, and considering the amount of public input that is available for people, who have issues with any proposed development that could go in there, I think that gives ample opportunity to speak up if there are particular concerns with a business. As far as I understand, I know there's been some traffic concerns. I know that there's a site readiness study that's been proposed, or I believe going on, for this 129 area. And I'm sure as part of this, a specific business going there as well. So from my understanding, I believe that there's ample opportunity for public input if there is a particular issue with a particular business. But I don't think that this amendment should pass, because the planning board should have flexibility if there is a proposed business that could go in here that really could help our economic situation. As you mentioned, we are at a crossroads here with businesses leaving, and we want to make sure that we're attracting good businesses to our town, and especially, considering the kinds of businesses that would be going in here as per these regulations. I think that would be really, really helpful for our economic situation. So that's why I'm going to be, I don't support this amendment. I think the planning board should have flexibility. If we do have a business that would be going in here that really could add, some really great economic strength to our town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Regazio, Precinct 7. I believe, as the speaker said, the initial person or company that wants to come in does not need this, does not need any revision of these articles. So my thought is, let's approve this amendment and let's see what this one company that's coming in doesn't need the removal of any of these restrictions. So let's see what happens, and we can always come back next, 6 months from now and put that proviso in. So I'm in favor of this amendment, because it doesn't restrict the investor that is now talking with the town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Johanna Shaw, Precinct 9. I can see both sides of this. I can understand people's unease with a provision here that allows the planning board to just disregard all of the A through I provisions, but I can also understand why we don't want to completely handicap the planning board from doing their job. I'm curious if the planning board would feel more comfortable if we were to amend the amendment or propose a separate amendment, I'm not sure which way that has to go, that would maybe say, instead of they can ignore A through I, they can waive up to 2 or 3 of those provisions. Can we ask anybody on the planning board if they would feel more comfortable with that?
Well, you can.
Okay, well, I'd like to.
Okay. They can decide to answer or not.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone on the planning board want to respond to the inquiry?
I'll take a shot. At the moment, I'm the secretary, Mike Raisbeck, Precinct 1, and I think the answer is we have not set up to have a meeting tonight, and for us to get together and make a decision on that would probably be pushing some of the rules a little bit. But I understand your point, and it's an interesting one.
I mean, personally, would you think that's a better happy medium?
I think the chance of any more than 1 or 2 of these ever being waived is so small anyway that it probably doesn't matter. Yeah, technically, I suppose you could waive 5 or 6 of them, but that would defeat the whole point of what's being proposed in the first place.
Question?
Given that the planning board doesn't seem to feel strongly about that as an option, I'm not sure if it makes sense to go through the process of amending the amendment or proposing a separate one. If there happens to be enough people behind me who jump up and say they like that idea, I'd be happy to propose that as an amendment, but I'm not going to hold everything up since there wasn't a clear answer in support of it.
Thank you.
Matt Hanson, Precinct 1. I guess I'm a little too close. John, you can start the clock. I'd just like to point out that this is not unique language that our town or our planning board invented. I completely agree that at first glance it does look a little scary to give the planning board that type of authority, but this language is in zoning bylaws all across Massachusetts. It's in other areas of our bylaw. It's in areas of the bylaws in every town that I've ever worked in, and there's a real world reason for it, as Evan explained, and I just want to hit on that again. If we remove this section of the bylaw and a business comes in and there's already a pre-existing 3,200 square foot retail space or restaurant space cut out in a building, they can't apply. If they only have room due to their setup for 45 or 48 seats, automatically they can't apply. And then just one more point, if you require businesses to come to town meeting to get approval, I can tell you from firsthand experience, on occasion, if you get a very large development that's going to take years to negotiate and go in, they're perfectly willing to wait while they do the rest of the work as part of a larger development, a $10 million investment. I deal with businesses every day, and if I tell them you have to wait 6 months and go to town meeting and get approval to get a 5-seat reduction, which is then going to permanently change the bylaw for every business after, they are going to immediately walk away. And thank you.
Thank you.
Diane Baxter, Precinct 4. Could you bring up the map that you showed before? Could you just show us on that map, are there properties that are not on Mill Road or Route 129 that if we didn't pass this amendment, there could be drive-throughs that aren't on Mill Road or 129?
So the top image indicates the beginning of the commercial exclusion zone in red along Mill Road. It begins after 278, 282 Mill Road. 278, 282 Mill Road is the 1 acre hole in the ground next to Princeton at 3.
And next to the new residential.
Correct.
In between
Correct.
that and the
anything
existing
beyond 278, 282 Mill Road is within the exclusion zone, meaning that no commercial entities, businesses related to retail, restaurants, banks, anything related to a drive-through is excluded, it is prohibited.
And on 129, so everything else that's on,
Everything else that's in dark gray outside of the red area is, and with the exception of the two single-family roads off Riverneck Road, are within the overlay. They currently allow retail amenities, commercial amenities. What's being proposed tonight is to restrict the drive-throughs associated with upscale fast casual to the main arterial of Billerica Road and a small portion of Mill Road.
so I guess the real basis for my question is, when I saw the amendment, I think that the thing that resonated most with me was the requirement A that says that these drive-throughs can only happen on Mill Road or 129. And I think that's sensible because of the traffic considerations. If there were smaller roads, or other roads that there would be more of a traffic impact, I wouldn't want to see that. So I think it's important to not allow that to be waived, to point A to be waived. So my bottom line question really is, are there other roads, if we do not pass that amendment, can projects come up with drive-throughs on roads other than 129 and Mill Road?
So are you asking about Mill and Turnpike or anywhere else within the?
Anywhere else within the zone. If the planning board decided to waive point A,
Yes,
so what other, so there could
it'd
be
be
on,
anywhere within the dark gray area, with the exception of the two residential streets, Monmouth, and there's another residential street on the northern end of Riverneck Road. Again,
Okay.
from McFarland, from a business model perspective, those entities are only going to locate on a main arterial. They're not going to locate on a side road like Progress Ave, Alpha Road. They want the visibility, they want the traffic counts, but 129 Billerica Road provides that.
I just wonder why it was included in the possible exclusions. So I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1.
and I'm a planning board member. And I'm opposed to this amendment. All of our overlays provide the planning board the flexibility to negotiate most of the criteria in the overlays. And it does that to be able to promote better development. It gives the planning board the ability to negotiate trade-offs so that we have the ability to provide some flexibility against one requirement, but push to have more investment and better construction in another area. The CVS is a good example of it. The developer came to us with something that looked like it was straight out of the Southwest. And the flexibility that was built in that gives the planning board negotiation power is why you have something that is somewhat more New England. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. I'm going to vote for this amendment. I do live in the area, and I'm familiar with it, quite familiar with it. Golden Cove Road, 2 days ago, the traffic at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's kind of after the commute, backed up from Billerica Road all the way past and under 495 and around the corner to Dunkin' Donuts. That was 2 days ago. This morning, it only backed up to the road right up to 495. This morning, there were 4 cars that went through the red light in front of me. Usually, it's 2 or 3. Today, it was 4. I do have a video if anybody wants to see. Each day, I've recorded them. We're about to add a $5 million Department of Transportation bridge from that part of Turnpike forward. With that kind of traffic and watching the number of people that go through the red light, that end of Billerica Road will not support any additional traffic in the morning. People that might want to go to a high-end, I think you said Starbucks kind of restaurant drive-through. At the other end, on Mill Road, at the sharp curve of Mill Road and 129, you can get about 6 or 8 cars, double lanes of cars, onto Mill, and then they have to stop. There's another stoplight there. They're not going to drive to Comcast from Route 3 from the southbound to whip in there and grab a quick breakfast. I suspect they won't come there for lunch either. So we're probably talking about just the people in that area of Turnpike Road on 129 because you can't get there from the center of town, from Westford, from Golden Cove Road. Ask the chief. He spent 6 traffic lights trying to get to the town hall. We all know that on our end of town. We just added 168 units on Turnpike Road. They're almost done. There was a truck blocking the entire lane on Turnpike this morning. I know that's part of the construction thing. I believe there's a sign law violation in the fence that they put up signs this week. We kind of ignore some of those kind of things. These are the kind of things that happen when you start forming a city. And this bylaw is more like a city regulation. Let the city planners take care of it, because town meeting meets only every 6 months or so. We also have a zoning board of appeals for $500. If you don't like what the planning board did for you, I believe you can go to the zoning board of appeals as a developer and say, I would like to put light outlines on my building, which we did. We passed a bylaw, and immediately the very first project, they went to the ZBA, and they put outlines with different color lights on the outline of a building. They're able to do that. So the zoning board of appeals is your outlet if you don't like it as a developer, what the planning board has permitted you to do, so they can override things. I think I heard something like, we're out of compliance, we need to adjust our zoning bylaws in general in our town by something 75 or 80% are out of our compliance because we've allowed variance in here. So I think if we do the test here, we approve this amendment, we can creep into this and not change what would have stopped this zoning overlay district in its tracks.
Thank you.
Both times when they tried to put this through town meeting, where they said, we will not have drive-throughs. We're trying to mimic what Westford does. They don't have drive-throughs. I was in Waltham, exactly that restaurant last night. They do not have drive-throughs in that overlay district that they built there. We don't need it. We're going to look like Billerica. And the towns that we listed on the chart Monday night, Concord,
1 minute.
Lexington, Bedford. There's a timing up there, I can see that. All those communities that we listed, pretty much, maybe except for Taunton down on the South Shore, don't have drive-throughs like this. And some of our places that people have adjusted to, you have Grubhub. You want something, you call up Grubhub, they go to the place, they pick it up, bring it to you. So if you're that tight on time and you don't want to go in and walk into a restaurant, you can always call one of those services and do it. So
Thank you.
I'm voting yes on the amendment.
Thank you.
George Zarros, Precinct 3. Mr. Moderator, you alluded to a second amendment. Could you tell us what that second amendment is?
Certainly. It is, and I'll read it out loud. It is to add a Section 3 as follows. The board may approve up to 3 permits. That's it. Yes, that's it was my editorial comment.
So, procedural question.
Sheila Pichette did.
So procedural question, it might go to town council. Can we table the amendment that we're on to go to that amendment? And the reason why I ask the question is it might alleviate some of the fears that some people have if the planning board is only allowed to give out up to 3 permits.
Yeah. Yeah, you could move to table this until after the other amendment is addressed.
So I would like to make that motion to table this amendment, to go to the next amendment and address that.
Okay, we need a vote on that. What? No, we never, but thank you. I appreciate your concern. Okay, so are we in a position where we can vote on just to table? We're voting on a motion to table this amendment until the other amendment is addressed. No, we're tabling the amendment that is before town meeting right now, which is to delete that language so that we can address the amendment that limits the number of drive-throughs to 3. Okay, please vote. And again, a vote yes is to table, so we get to the next amendment first, and then we'll go back to this one.
Interesting parliamentary maneuver there by George Zaharoulis. Moderator Curlin pointed out that he took the amendments in the order that he received them. Perhaps knowing that this was going to be a protracted discussion, I would think he could have used his discretion to take up the second amendment in the first place. But we'll just have to see how this plays out.
So the motion to table passes, 85 in favor, 40 opposed, no abstentions. So now, Mrs. Pichette, would you please take the microphone and just repeat what I said before?
Could I just give a little background?
Sure.
Sheila Pichette, Precinct 4. I do believe that in most cases, for most dissensions in our warrant articles, there is a compromise. I would like this to be a compromise before going back to the first amendment. But to go back a little bit in some years, maybe 10 years ago, the master plan of 2010, we wondered how we would infuse and revitalize the community to get more taxes throughout. And since then, you know, that has been explained through the Economic Development Committee. The revitalization has really taken on a wonderful personality on its own. The state has given us money. I want the state to be proud of Chelmsford. I think we need to revitalize this. I think this is the next step in the revitalization of that corridor, and I am fully in support of this. And also, having heard that it's very good for the community to utilize stores like this, but yet be concerned about the traffic, I think it's very good to limit the number of permits. So basically, the amendment reads, the board may approve up to 3 permits.
By adding a section 3.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or discussion regarding that amendment?
If the planning board would like to accept this as a friendly amendment?
Okay. Well, we still have to, we don't need to vote if that's the case. If the proponent has accepted it as a friendly amendment, then we go back to the original amendment, which is the amendment to strike the language at the end of paragraph 1.
Chris LaValle, Precinct 4. I have a question about what just happened first, and then another question. So could you clarify the item number 3 is being amended to the original article, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that brings up my second question. If this language for the flexibility of the board stays in there, are they able to override that number?
No, because your motion addresses Article 1, not paragraph 3.
Okay. Okay. So while that's great, that change still does not address my concerns and the reason why I brought up the original amendment. There are a number of other provisions in there that will allow us to keep a high bar for drive-throughs. Specifically, item number letter G, where the reusable dinnerware. Places like McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts do not have reusable dinnerware. So if one of those places were to come before the board, they could just waive line item G, and we would end up getting a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Dunkin' Donuts if they have a pretty big restaurant and meet all the other criteria. So my concern with this is, while I appreciate the board needing flexibility in making their decisions, the flexibility also comes at a cost. One example is a recent decision that the board made about 152 Turnpike Road related to the overlay. That board had some flexibility, and that decision allowed 6 single-family homes in less than 1 acre property. So my concern is, with that flexibility, they were able to adjust the zoning to go against the wishes of many neighbors and townspeople, and what many reps felt is against the intent of the overlay district itself. So my concern here is that we don't do the same mistake twice. If another restaurant wants to come in and they don't meet the requirements, they can do what this restaurant did, wait the time, come back to the town meeting, and we can update the zoning if we need to. The concern that these restaurants are coming at a fast pace to go into here and is not necessarily true. And I think that this restaurant coming in waited the time. Others should be able to as well.
Thank you. As a purely a procedural matter, we should entertain a motion to table reinstate the original motion. Take off the table. Okay. All in favor? We'll just do vote count. Any opposed? Okay, so we're back on. We're technically back on, but Mr. LaValle, I will acknowledge that your statement is part of that.
Marlene Cody, Precinct 4. I just have a question about the amendment that was accepted. The 3 count, is that like at any time, in a year, forever? What's the time period on that?
Well, the reading of the article just says shall be limited to 3. So that would be until such time as town meeting decides that they want to increase the number or decrease the
So that's total forever, 3, right? Okay, thank you.
That's okay. We're okay.
Tom Fall, Precinct 5, I move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. So I don't know if we have, is that on the system? Will be in a minute. The question is the amendment. We are voting now to move the question so that we're terminating debate, okay? So on the amendment, okay, this requires a 2/3 vote. So all in favor of moving the amendment question, please vote.
This is Kelly Beatty. To this day, I am convinced that most town meeting members are, well, maybe not most, quite a few, are unclear on what moving the question actually means. A lot of them think that it's a rush to actually vote on the amendment, in this case, when in fact it's really to limit debate, to end debate. And then after this is approved, which it looks like it's going to be handily, the very next.
So the
vote on
motion to move the amendment has passed, 117 in favor, 9 opposed. So now we are going to be voting on the amendment. This just requires a majority vote. And again, in case anyone is not paying attention, this is to strike that last sentence under paragraph 1, which says the board may waive any provision A1 where it determines that the project will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the bylaw. That is what you're voting on, to strike that.
Surprising number of no votes here, so this is a vote essentially to leave the original article intact. It's going to quite clearly be defeated, and so we'll move back to the original article, for which there's already been a great deal of debate. So we'll see how much longer the moderator will entertain debate on the main.
The amendment fails, 39 in favor, 83 opposed, 1 abstention. Now we get back to the original warrant article 10. Yes, and just so there's no confusion, with the friendly amendment that limits the number of drive-throughs to 3.
Scott Davidson, Precinct 3. I guess this is a question for the proponent of the article. I note in Chapter 195 of our bylaws, there's another section called Terminology, where we specifically define what a restaurant is, and we specifically define what a fast food restaurant is. I'm wondering if they considered in coming up with this article to specifically define what an upscale fast casual restaurant is.
So a decision was made to define it specific to 129. So in other words, the zoning strategy is to treat drive-throughs associated with traditional fast food differently in 129 than the rest of the town. So what you see in Drum Hill would not be allowed in 129.
Okay. And then one other question. I think in your comments you mentioned that the hope is that such establishment would be a catalyst for others to join in. Do you have any, I don't know, evidence isn't the right word, but do you have anything like that would kind of back that up for us?
No, and that's the whole point of this exercise, is that there is no market pressure. As I mentioned, 197 Billerica Road was approved for a restaurant and retail, and they can't find a restaurateur to take that space. So when people meet with us and they have an idea, we feel compelled to bring it to the attention of the community. The original goal of town meeting and adopting the overlay to begin with was to save the park, revitalize the park, and strengthen it back to its heyday when it was 25% CIP.
And that hasn't happened in the 2.5 years since we've adopted it. So we're trying some more stuff now.
Correct. One of the tenets of the bylaw that town meeting adopted was to address market trends and conditions.
So I'm going to vote against this. You can start the clock for debate. I'm going to vote against this article. I understand the plight of this area and that we're trying to revitalize it, and there's challenges, and I get it. But it just seems to me that over the last 5 or 6 years, we continually just throw stuff on the wall and sees what sticks, and so far nothing's been sticking. So now we're going to try to see if this sticks. And I don't think that's a good plan, so I'm going to vote against this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis Sheehan, Precinct 4. I have a question to start out with. Is the developer for this project saying he must have a drive-in or he won't do the project? Is that pretty much what the
Yes, what the proponent has said to us during that EDC meeting is that this is the catalyst for them to make the other economic investments. More importantly, they view this particular tenant as the catalyst to be able to sign other tenants to this particular property.
So the coffee shop portion of this is...
I know it's labeled as a coffee shop. I can tell you that the way they've described it is a breakfast, lunch, and dinner restaurant. There are a small regional entity that has several.
Coffee.
Yep, I know it's labeled as a coffee shop.
Sure.
What I'm trying to explain to you that it's the way they've described it to us. It's not a coffee shop. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Scratch kitchen. Couple locations in Massachusetts. Couple in southern New Hampshire.
Okay, you can start the clock. So I've been to Burlington's Fifth Avenue, as well as that new area in Burlington they're building out near Building 19.5. And neither of these locations have drive-ins. I've also just returned from a business trip to an area outside of DC where they're building up one of these live, work, and play mini-cities. Again, no drive-ins. In each of these situations, the concept is to get people out of their cars and keeping things close together so people can walk from place to place. And when I was in DC, that's what we did. Drive-ins, by their very nature, fly in the face of the concept and will only serve to increase traffic and actually attract more cars to an already congested area. An example, of course, is the Dunkin' Donuts along 3A. If you've ever gone down 3A in the morning, Dunkin' Donuts backs out onto the street. This is a coffee shop. It will back up, and you probably won't be able to get into this place because the cars will back up. So I strongly urge this body to defeat this ill-advised zoning change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy Sillings, Feeding 7. Following the previous question, explain, the road does not take care of one side, it takes care of both sides. And so I might want to go to my doctor to the other side that nobody cares about because it's different. How do we have the the partial that belongs to nobody and might have some important driving there? How do we handle that? You probably have an easy answer.
I didn't understand the question.
You don't?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Going down here, the road goes down here. Here's the buildings that we all approved. Here's some other building that hasn't been approved, but by gosh, that's where my doctor is. That's where my
And you want to walk there?
And many a time, even now, that's a lot of traffic on that road. So
Sure.
how do you handle that?
So again, if you recall the original vision, which is still the strategy and vision for 129, is to have it remain as an employment center with a baseline level of amenities so that it can be walkable. As incrementally as the planning board and the town develop projects, the planning board will require pedestrian improvements, crosswalks, sidewalks, things of that nature. That will be a public-private partnership. The planning board requires public improvements with all the developments they approve, including sidewalks, pocket parks, more open space, traffic mitigation, traffic improvements. That's the vision for 129. The challenge has been we haven't had the scope and scale of developments that warrants a certain level of public improvements.
How far is the Harvard Medical from the start of your road?
About 3/4 of a mile off the highway interchange. Harvard Vanguard's closer to Apollo Drive.
Okay. All right, so that you're going to be...
So the town currently has a sidewalk plan to put sidewalks, along Billerica Road. That predates the overlay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Alvin Draymond, Precinct 5. Just a comment, it is often the case that a drive-through will be the financial make or break for a restaurant because it's that little extra revenue. Just consider that when you're voting whether, we could be voting out the ability for a restaurant to succeed there. Then we get a restaurant in and it fails. Get another one in and it fails. And then after a while, you won't ever get one in. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris LaValle, Precinct 4, you can start the clock. As a parent of young kids who are trying to get them healthy meal options, I was really looking forward to this article because I think this project coming in had some real potential to bring in some upscale restaurants that we could get to if we're running from soccer practice to home or had kids in the car asleep. So I was really hoping to be able to vote for this article. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to vote against it because of the risk involved in future projects that may come up. With the ability for too much flexibility in this article, I really don't want any more McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts being able to be approved. So I unfortunately have to vote against this, and I would urge others to do the same.
Thank you.
Debbie Deary, Precinct 6. I have a question. I would like to know, what is the traffic count on a daily basis on Route 129 in this area?
Down near the interchange, it's 17,500 trips per day.
I have lived in the area 44 years. The traffic this morning was backed up in front of my house on Stedman Street to Smith Street. It's almost like that on a daily basis. And if not backed up, they are driving quite fast. And I'm asking this for a reason. Chelmsford Street, the trucks park on Chelmsford Street to use Dunkin' Donuts. Many times, maybe you haven't seen it, but the cars do go onto Chelmsford Street waiting in line.
Forgive me, are you asking a question or are you engaged in debate?
You can start the clock, it doesn't make any difference. What I want to point out is the traffic in our area is so bad. To have a drive up that's adjacent to 129 and off one of those roads, I cannot vote for it. The traffic is that bad in our area. They're going through red lights all the time. There's so many accidents. It took me 20 minutes to go from my house to before Vanguard. And that's a long time. And I was late for my appointment. And it was a morning appointment. And it's less than a mile. So I can't vote for this. I have one question, though. I would like to know why the two companies that are leaving our town, where are they going and why?
So Analog is going to Wilmington. That's where they own their real estate, so they're doing a consolidation. Cadence is going to Burlington, and we have written confirmation that over a 2-year period, ultimately they are going to Burlington for the amenities and the lack of amenities on 129.
So how many buildings are empty now?
We have 16% vacancy in the corridor, approximately about 5 entire buildings empty. 300 Billerica, 330 Billerica, 220 Mill Road, all of the analog buildings will be emptied out. And Cadence is leaving, so that'll be 279 Billerica. So we have large multi-story office buildings that are meant for a single tenant that are difficult to recruit and attract businesses without amenities nearby.
With that being said, there was never any, and Kronos was there before. So what I'd like to know is, if we have even more buildings empty now, who's going to use these restaurants?
The workforce coming into the buildings,
But what workforce? You just told me you have 60%, and there's 2 more leaving.
We have
I mean,
16% vacancy, and so it's important to bring businesses in that have amenities on site to retain the workforce and bring the interest from the employers to site locations that are well convenienced and well amenitized in modern buildings.
was there any other business other than a restaurant that is interested in settling in that area, to build in that area?
There's nothing confirmed. There are businesses looking, but there are no committed interest specifically because of the lack of amenities. It's been made very clear to us several times.
Well, my other question is, what they have in Westford at their square, there's no interest to have something like that on 129?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar.
So there's no vacant land as large as Cornerstone Square in Westford. 129 is built out. It's built out. It's a 25-year-old suburban office park. Its heyday was back during Apollo Computers. It's had a incremental, steady decline over a decade period. We articulated all of these data points 2.5 years ago to you, and I think town meeting understood.
Well, that's why we voted for it.
Things are not trending in the right direction. So it's a classic chicken and the egg. What we're hearing from the businesses, and now we finally have it in writing, confirmation, businesses are leaving because of lack of amenities. Businesses that are looking to locate here are also choosing not to locate here and choosing to locate in other adjacent communities because they're closer to amenities.
Well, Kronos, because I'm familiar with that area, there's the 99 and there's the Tavern at the Square. But I don't think, is there anything else except for maybe in Kronos?
Yeah, the problem is that she's asking questions. Ms. Derry.
Okay, I'll sit down.
Thank you.
But I don't think there's anything else that's near Kronos besides that.
Ms. Bowman?
Chris Bowman, Precinct 4. You can start the clock, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, a few things. As Mr. Belansky pointed out, the purpose for the BAOD along Route 129 was primarily to fill the office space. At the time as it was presented in fall 2016, the idea or the vision floated was this was to be a high-end business area. And that's one of the reasons why drive-throughs were not allowed for the restaurants, in order to encourage high-end restaurants in that particular area. So I drove around town from Analog Devices to see how many restaurants and how long it would take to get there with already exists. There are 35 restaurants in town within 10 minutes drive of Analog Devices. Of that, drive-throughs are just the Dunkin' Donuts on Route 110 and drive-throughs on Drum Hill Road. Now, we were told in 2016 that part of ensuring that this was a high-end business development was to prevent Route 129 becoming a Drum Hill Road. Drum Hill Road has multiple strip malls. Right now, we're in the process of having multiple strip malls in along Mill and Billerica Road. Now, 197 Billerica Road project is 2 buildings with a restaurant and retail store. 272 to 282 Mill Road is a restaurant and retail on 1 building. And this new project that's going to come up at 330 Billerica Road is going to be another restaurant and retail. Now, 197 Billerica Road is having difficulty getting a restaurant. 278 to 282 Mill Road has been approved for applicability. So it's still in the conceptual stage. So there's a potential right now with the 278 to 282 Mill Road, the 330 Billerica Road, and the 197 Billerica Road strip malls having drive-through restaurants. So the contention is that in order to have these so-called upscale fast food restaurants, they have to have a drive-through in order for them to be financially viable. Oh, and by the way, as far as I can tell, what upscale fast food restaurants means is not a McDonald's. Sorry, lost my place for a second. All right, so things like Chipotle, Panera Bread, Starbucks, specifically have been stated as examples of what these upscale fast food restaurants would be. So Chelmsford has a Panera Bread and Chipotle on Drum Hill Road. It does not have a drive-through, and it is thriving. Westford has a Chipotle. It does not have a drive-through, and it is thriving. It also has a McDonald's, which does not have a drive-through. It is also thriving. Westford does not allow drive-throughs in their town, period, for any restaurant. In addition to that, there's a Panera Bread and Chipotle's in Nashua near Barnes & Noble, which do not have drive-throughs, and they're thriving. So the contention that drive-throughs are absolutely necessary—
1 minute.
Thank you— is not accurate. So we do not need more drive-throughs. The other thing that it's important to note is that right now there are office buildings on Elizabeth Drive, the 278 to 282 Mill Road, and now at the 330 Billerica Road, along with Princeton Properties, right there at that intersection of Mill Road and Billerica Road. That is, these projects are jamming that intersection, and it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. What we do need is high-end restaurants, which this town and this area is specifically lacking. So I think that should be the focus of Town Hall and the Planning Board, is high-end restaurants, and consistent with the business, high-end business area. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Henry Parley, Planning Board, Precinct 70, and stop the clock. I thought when this first came up, I remember even saying to Evan, no Starbucks? He said, no Starbucks. And I was like, boy, I says, that's a really good business opportunity for that area. The other thing, when they came in front of us, and it's these things that we've outlined that we want to have for the restaurant, 50 seats, the flatware. Yes, we're trying to get a little bit better, but we just had a speaker come up and say there's a Panera Bread in Drum Hill. If you're working there, you're not going to want to drive to Drum Hill. I'm telling you that right now. There's a Panera Bread in Westford. I understand that. But if you want to get one of those restaurants in this area to pull them in, to come in now, you have to have something extra for them. You gotta, this is not a place that one of those, they're gonna go right now. They have to have something to try to pull them into the area to get them going. We passed the split tax rate. We wanted to get more money into the town.
This is a great opportunity to get food tax brought into the town. We don't zone for taxes, but I think this is a great opportunity. I'm going to vote for this, and I hope the rest of you will too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
George Zarros, Precinct 3, you can start the clock. The CEIOD and BAOD is not very old to the planning board. And as the projects have come in, the planning board has learned that, whether it was mistakes made or not, the planning board has tried to bring in or work on projects, and they've learned, and they'll continue to learn. But I think that this process that goes along with the CIOD is, first thing that it has to do is a conceptual comes before the planning board for the planning board to look at and review before it's advertised for the public. So it's a public-private partnership. So with the guidelines laid out here, the planning board can really strongly enforce the A through I as they see fit. So that project, when it comes before them, eventually when they have to apply for site plan and a special permit, they've already vetted some of these things out. So the applicant has a good idea of exactly what the planning board is looking for. And like I said before, the planning board is sensitive to drive-throughs. They understand that they can back up into the street, and they will, I'm sure, scrutinize that greatly. I was torn on this article at the very beginning because I was involved originally with the CEIOD and the BAOD. And I truly believe that as time goes, things change. And we have to continue to modify and look at our bylaws every single year, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. That's why the master plan is being formed again, is to look at other topics so we can move the town forward. The other thing too is, as you bring places in, you bring some of these fast casual restaurants in, the others will follow. Eventually, hopefully, if you get enough people in the area, the high-end restaurants will start to follow. They'll start to see that people are in the area. It's an alive area. Right now, if you go down 129 at night, it is dark, it is quiet. But as you bring people to the area, those others will follow. So I hope that you vote in favor of this. With the amendment of limiting it to 3, gives the planning board an opportunity to be real picky on what they want to do and what they want in there. So I hope that you will vote in favor of this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5, start the clock. We have spent in town meeting, I don't know how many hours on Route 129, probably hundreds. And we've done it because there are companies that are leaving the area to go someplace else that's more convenient for them, whatever that means. It may be the tax rate, it may be something else, but we do know one thing. These companies are looking for the possibility of having amenities nearby. Now, nobody is going to drive from Route 129 to Drum Hill to go to Panera for lunch. It's not going to happen. They're not going to drive into Westford or Billerica to Panera Bread for lunch. They want something that they can get to and get back from in 10 minutes. So having a good drive-through restaurant that also has an indoor component is something that would add an extreme amount of value to that property area. And if there is a company interested in doing it that sounds like they can meet all those criteria, that sounds good to me. We can continue to find very simple ways to deny a company that might have a drive-through, that, it's certainly not going to be a McDonald's, it's not going to be, a Wendy's in that position, but we can find a reason to say no to everything. But I think this is about time to say yes to a restaurant that sounds like it's going to see a lot of people internally, has breakfast, lunch, and dinner, uses a drive-through to make up the difference in their profitability so that they have a stronger business case, and bring an attractive place to eat to the 129 area. So if we're going to build that area back up, if we're going to do it piece by piece, brick by brick, maybe a bank will show up there someday, maybe a CVS, so that people can go get their prescriptions, can do a little banking at that location. Those aren't big activity locations, but big activity businesses. But a restaurant is something we can look forward to as a town. You know, we've got places we can go for banking and CVLs elsewhere, but those people work there, so they're looking for a place where they can grab something to eat, maybe on the way to work, maybe on the way home from work, maybe if it's a restaurant that provides healthy food, we go there for dinner. So it's as easy as it is to say no to everything. I think it comes a time when we have to say yes to a very thought-out plan here that's going to be monitored by the planning board and allow the town to take one small step forward by putting an amenity in place where it's needed, and it won't be the first one. There'll be a couple of more amenities, whether they're restaurants or, you know, a place to bring your clothes to take off to a cleaner's, to be more comfortable for the businesses we want to come in and the businesses we want to retain in the town. I urge you very strongly to vote yes for this and move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Johanna Shaw, Precinct 9. I have a question about Mill Road. The article says that the drive-thrus would be allowed on Billerica Road and Mill Road, but I thought I heard during the presentation that Mill and Turnpike were in the exclusion zone, and the map was kind of small and hard to see, so I'm just curious exactly what on Mill would be allowed with this?
Yeah, 278, 282 Mill Road is where the line will be drawn. The line was drawn last town meeting.
So it's only that one parcel that we voted on last town meeting that would be able to have a drive-through? Or is there
No, it's
anything
extended.
else?
It's extended down Mill Road, including that property.
So it's that and what, the building where Lifelinks was?
Correct. And then heading towards Billerica Road. Correct.
Okay, well, I don't think there's anything further
Correct.
down there, is there? I'm all for supporting the development of 129. We've sunk a lot of energy and time and money into this. I'm just not convinced that Mill Road is the place where these drive-throughs should be allowed. For anybody who, oh, you can start the clock, sorry. For anybody who drives in that area, you know that Mill has two very sharp curves at the end, and these parcels are right in the middle of those. So a lot of in and out traffic that's not familiar with the fact that there's traffic coming from those sides is probably a disaster waiting to happen. Also, if you're coming down 129 from the Billerica side, turning left onto Mill Road, there are two left turn lanes, and it's kind of unwritten and understood for the people who are used to it that the left turn lane is for continuing down Mill, and the right-hand one of those left turn lanes is typically for people who make the turn and immediately go to the right down Elizabeth to those office parks. But when there's somebody who doesn't know the area, if you're turning there, you know it, because then you get cut off because they're trying to go from that right turn lane and down Mill. If we get drive-through traffic coming off through that turn a lot, it's going to be a whole lot of cutoffs and a whole lot of accidents waiting to happen. So I'm all for supporting 129, but I really have a problem with the Mill properties being included in this.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Doug Bruce, Precinct 9. I actually have a couple of questions regarding tax policy. One of the statements that was made earlier is that the businesses, the properties are still paying property tax. I had just conferred with the assessor. We are losing out on personal property taxes with...
Now, are you asking a question, or do you already know the answer?
Well, I would ask Mr. Reen.
Okay. We have a policy that you cannot ask a question which you already know the answer. It is possible that Mr. Souza or somebody else may be able to say what... You can certainly say that in argument that I know this, and we'll listen.
All right. Well, let me go ahead and start the clock.
Oh, sorry.
I'm long-winded, but I'm not that long.
There you go.
All right. Comcast, Mercury Systems, Kronos, Analog Devices now, and Cadence Systems, all businesses, large employers with high-quality jobs that have left Chelmsford, and left Chelmsford with a real estate hole. The personal property taxes that all those businesses paid also left. Yes, the buildings are still there. Yes, the property owners are still paying the property taxes on those buildings. But after those commercial buildings are empty for some period of time, guess what? Those building owners come and seek property tax abatements. Every time those empty buildings get abated or the property taxes, the value of the properties are reduced, guess who makes up the difference? All of us. That's an increase of our real estate, our home real estate property taxes. Now, I know everybody's very concerned about our own personal or our own real estate property taxes on our houses. I support this article because I believe that revitalization of the 129 corridor is really important to this town and to our property tax base. We have a lot of different constituencies here that request services of the city. We have a number of people in the room who are huge supporters of the school system and education and the children, and we want smaller class sizes. Guess what? It takes more money. We have people in the room who are big supporters of senior services. Guess what? It takes more money, right? Who's going to pay that more money? We have empty buildings that we could fill and increase our property taxes and our personal property taxes. We could pull in restaurant meals taxes into the town, and we have an opportunity here, and we're not taking advantage of it right now. We're trying. I support what the EDC is doing very strongly, and there's one other knock-on effect that I'd like the residents to consider. There's a Tedeschi Market, or Tedeschi sold it, it became 7-Eleven on Mill Road, that recently closed down. And I know a lot of people in my neighborhood were really disappointed over that closure. One of the reasons for that closure is that they lost a tremendous amount of business of employees that were up on the 129 area coming there for lunch, right? And those businesses went away, those employees went away, so they weren't coming to that market, and that market wasn't viable anymore. So that's one of the knock-on effects that we don't necessarily see. I urge everybody here to support this article. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, good evening. John Souza, 88 Carlisle Street. I'd like to speak as a resident on this article. You know, I should point out I live in East Chelmsford, less than 2 miles from the location where the Route 129 corridor is, and I support this article for the following reasons. I'm very familiar with the area. What we've seen and what we've heard from folks over this town meeting and previous ones is a steady exodus of businesses from those buildings on Route 129. We heard tonight from the proponents of the article that right now, with the national, state, and local economy humming along, we have a 16% vacancy rate down on that corridor. What concerns me is what's going to happen when we finally tip into a recession. Not saying it's going to happen, but we know it will happen someday. What kind of vacancy rate will we have at that point? It's clear to me from listening to the discussion that we have to do something. We have to create a catalyst to get, and as the proponent said earlier tonight, this isn't just a wild plan that we're throwing out there. And a business investor has come to the planning board or the community development director and their office, the economic and the business development director, and said, this is what we'd like to do with our building. We'd like to make this a first-class building. I believe they said invest over $10 million in it, put some classy restaurants in there, and yes, it would mean a drive-through. But despite all of the business amenity overlay district efforts in that, we're just not seeing any restaurants that want to go down there. And the one thing we've heard from corporate management and the employees is the reason there's the exodus of business is times have changed. People, although they'd save money doing this, people don't want to brown bag it anymore and bring a coffee a thermos with coffee in it. They want restaurants to go to. They want them right near their workplace. I think from all the discussion that we've heard tonight, it's clear to me that we have to do something to try to attract some restaurants. So I urge the body to support this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick question off of what John Souza had asked or said to, I guess, Evan. Is that the dollar amount we're talking here of investment, $10 million?
Yes.
Okay, so we're looking at a potential $10 million buyer or investor in the area. And I just want to, for everybody sitting here at town meeting, and you can start the clock good, just sort of give a recap of where we've been. Because over the last 3 years, as we've undertaken this, the whole town meeting said, yes, we want to do what it takes to redevelop 129, and then did the BAOD. We sat and we waited and we watched, and then the town said we need to do something. So we allocated money to hire a business development director. We asked that business development director to get involved in 129, go out to the businesses and talk to them. She's done a ton of investigative work. I know that her and the EDC have gone out and handed out surveys to the businesses. They've met with the business owners. They actually have an exit interview that they give out to the businesses that are leaving. And when they get it back, they read that and they compile the data. And the EDC and Lisa Marone have put this together, and they're hearing from the businesses the reasons why they're leaving. So unless we want to call them a liar, what they're hearing is that there are no amenities. There's nowhere to go. When you talk to these big companies that own these franchises that look at 129, the traffic counts aren't quite there yet. The foot traffic isn't quite there yet. And as businesses are leaving, it's going down. So we are going nowhere. So we are looking at a potential investment of $10 million. Tax on that, easy math, at $22 per thousand roughly is $220,000. We passed a healthy budget Monday night. So the question becomes, where are we going to get the money? So we know the answer. We've been told the answer. We've done the right work. We have the committees in place that are going out and taking the surveys. We know the results. So now it's up to us to act on them. And I think the friendly amendment, living it to 3, is a great sort of middle of the road meeting halfway here. So I just want everybody to think about the big picture, what we've done so far, where we are today, and the answers that are in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Reddy, Precinct 1. I'd like to move the question.
Okay, we have a motion to move the question.
For longtime observers of town meeting, you know that Dennis Reddy was famous for moving the question. It's clear that his son has taken up that mantle and continuing the tradition.
We need 2/3 vote on this. So you're cutting off debate, so.
If you allow for the fact that the special town meeting took approximately half hour to get through, we've now proceeded for an hour and a half into the regular town meeting, and this will soon be the first article that we have voted on in that time. Not that this discussion wasn't important and necessary.
Okay, the motion to move the question has been approved, 111 in favor, 16 opposed. Now we are going to be voting on the bylaw amendment, Article 10. This also requires a 2/3 vote.
And that 2/3
The yes vote will be to accept the bylaw change.
That 2/3 vote is important.
I'm sorry? Okay, so this is essentially, it's what is in front of you, except that it limits the number of drive-throughs to 3.
Looks like it's going to pass handily with more than 100 votes in favor and only 22 opposed. The impression I had was that the opposition was more entrenched than this, but clearly this is passing. One thing I want you to note, that's 128
The article passes 105 in favor, 23 opposed.
There are supposed to be 168 town meeting representatives. So that means
Articles
that
11,
we're roughly
12,
at only
and 13
3/4
have already been addressed in the consent
of
agenda,
the
so we are going to move
people
on
who are
to
supposed
Article
to be here.
14.
Where are the other 40?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 14 is the final vote for an enterprise fund for the upcoming fiscal year. This is for what would be the first full fiscal year of the Stormwater Management Enterprise Fund. You may recall 2 years at town meeting, we had a vigorous debate over the enterprise fund for stormwater, the newly enacted federal regulations. The federal government then pulled the plug on that, but then a year later, back in 2018, reinstated it. So we were here 6 months ago, voted the first portion of the fiscal year, basically a 6-month provision to get going under this enterprise fund. Now we have the budget for the next phase, which is the full fiscal year operation. You can see the amount provided for personnel and expenses. It's roughly $1 million for stormwater. This, as you know, is the surcharge that goes on the budget. Onto your sewer bill. It also goes as part of the requirements to meet the federal obligations. We also are enacting, as was discussed at the town meeting 2 years ago, the next phase in terms of capital equipment, as you see listed up on the screen. So again, as voted, this would fund us for the upcoming year. The surcharge would remain unchanged at the $40 that is now in effect. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 14.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommend approval for Article 14.
Now is an opportunity for question or debate.
Ed Buckley, Precinct 6. This was brought to us by way of unfunded mandate from the federal government through the EPA, correct?
That's correct.
The current administration in Washington is in the process of, for every new regulation implemented, 2 will be struck down. So for instance, if this gets struck down by the White House, where do we go from there in the future? Where would the program go?
Well, in Massachusetts, it would keep moving forward because the Massachusetts adopted the federal regulations as the state's regulations. So even if the federal government were to repeal the revision, knowing the political and environmental climate in Massachusetts, I would expect that this regulation would remain in effect in Massachusetts. So that's the answer. So I don't think it would go to waste and everything would just be junked. Quite frankly, the Massachusetts would continue its trend in strong environmental policy, and therefore, if the federal mandate were eliminated, the state mandate would I believe, would remain in effect.
Well, this puts a undue burden on small and medium-sized businesses in town. They're taking the bulk of this whack, correct?
Yes, everybody's taking a whack.
But
Small,
the commercial
medium, and large
businesses in particular are taking a heavier burden, correct?
Everybody, I mean, we're talking in the general sense, I suppose. In the general sense, business has taken a whack on this as well because the way we've instituted the financing mechanism for this, we've charged every residential property owner a $40 surcharge. The charge for commercial property is based on the amount of impervious material on a property. So again, if you're the Chelmsford Mall, that's a huge amount, or if you're up in Walmart, that's a huge amount. However, if you're a small business, that doesn't have much impervious material, for example, on Progress Avenue, obviously your proportion is different than a fully paved parcel.
So this is countrywide.
Yes, these provisions have been in effect for decades as part of the clean water efforts. In Massachusetts, they were most recently regulated about 12 years ago, and then even prior to that, back in the 70s. And I think that's why, to go to your question, that's probably why it wasn't repealed, is because it's been established as policy for generations in terms of improving the water quality in the lakes and rivers and streams across Massachusetts and across the country.
Well, the town of Drake is in the process of appealing this or fighting this, correct?
That is, no.
Drake-it?
No, the town of Drake-it conducted a study, much like the town of Chelmsford, because I spoke to my colleague in the town of Drake-it. They came back with the same magnitude of a project. They hired a different engineer, came back with the same magnitude. What they're doing is they're basically gutting their budget to fund the program. You will read about it, and it'll be announced probably maybe tonight. I don't know when their meeting is. What's going on there is basically they are not proposing to assess a surcharge. Instead, what they're going to do is not fund their OPEB obligation and kick that to the next generation. They're not going to hire additional police officers. They're going to not invest in capital infrastructure. So basically what they're doing is they're kicking other cans down the road in order not to affect a surcharge. But they have to meet this obligation, and they, like everyone else, because it's a mandated requirement.
Well, it's census-driven too, right? So the smaller communities out in the Berkshires, they don't have to comply, correct?
It's not based on population. It's based on the rate of commercial and industrial development in a community. So yes, rural areas out in western Massachusetts are not subject to this bylaw in federal regulation. However, urbanized areas, primarily everybody east of of Worcester, and as well as some of the cities out in Western Mass are. However, a community like Carlisle is not subject to this because they don't have commercial and industrial property that would make them subject to this requirement. So therefore, even though they're located adjacent to us, they're not subject to this regulation.
Well, I think between the split tax rate that's been thrown on the commercial enterprises in town in this, it's an undue burden, but it is what it is, I suppose. So.
Thank you.
Paul Regazio, Precinct 7. I just have several questions for Mr. Cohen. 2 years ago, I think when this program was started, we were looking for, or the town was looking for about $2 million of operating expenses and about $2 million of capital. I think we approved $1 million of capital last October, I believe, and you're asking for another $500,000 with this proposal. Is that the end of the capital as far as the?
No, we will have a third phase. As we said, we would have to ramp up because the discussion 2 years ago was that you can't possibly take all this on you in one fiscal year. So the idea was to ramp up. We did the first phase in this current fiscal year. This will be phase 2, and then there'll be a final phase in fiscal 21.
That's for, same question on the operating budget, because the operating budget that was proposed was $2 million. We're now asking for $1 million, roughly $1 million. So this is, again, just the start. So next year or the year, we're looking at about $2 million operating budget.
I don't think it'll hit 2 million. My guess is you'll probably be about $1.5 million or so when it's all done. We're basically doing it in thirds.
Okay, so this is increased. How many employees are there in the current plan?
With this budget that's voted, we'd have 2 work crews, as well as a division director, a MIS person, and an engineer. Yep, that's what we'd have.
So that's what, 5, 6 people altogether?
9. Nine.
Okay. And the other comment I have is this, with this program, this relieves the DPW of certain efforts that they were doing, like street cleaning. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We've some responsibilities that were done by the Highway Division have been transferred over into this Stormwater Division, and I guess yes. Yes.
So again, this relieves. So the DPW is relieved of some duties. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sheila Pichette, Precinct 4. I think this is a wonderful initiative by the state, and I wholly embrace it. But I do have a question. I believe, from what I understand, that nonprofit organizations are charged the same as profit organizations or commercial. Is that true?
That is correct. It is a surcharge, just like we charge nonprofit organizations water, or in our case, sewer bills. So yes, much like we charge those organizations for sewer, they do pay the applicable surcharge. That's correct.
And this will remain the same? There's no change of that in the future?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. An individual business, in order to save, let's say, half of the expense, I know one that's paying $15,000 this year, could they tear up half their parking lot and make gravel the basis for their parking lot, making it permeable, and therefore cutting the individual business's effective rate by half?
Yeah. Yes. If they remove the impervious surface, they could reduce their surcharge. The challenge, though, is if you remove that surface, the question is do you have a suitable parking area? That would be something that have to be analyzed because the law has to deal with the idea of parking area and the runoff that goes off of those areas. So yes, a business could reduce its impervious area. I don't think it's as simple as saying just rip out the asphalt. You can now park as many vehicles in that area because there are still runoff concerns if it's being utilized as a parking area.
But based on our calculation, it's based on impervious surface. So
correct.
If you had a legitimate parking area with, say, granite pavers with lots of holes in them, we wouldn't calculate that.
No, that would count.
So
For example, let's say the Chelmsford Mall, many are familiar with it. If the property owner wanted to remove that parking area from the upper portion of the mall that is hardly ever utilized. They could do that to reduce their, if they could reduce their surcharge, because it would no longer be used as a parking area. That's correct.
So they could actually work on that. Do we require a paved asphalt or concrete parking surface, or is that beyond your expert opinion there?
Well, the plans that come before the planning board and also for functionality in New England, I don't know how, particularly in the month of April this year, you would have gotten by without a paved parking area. Because we certainly have had a number of ample stormwater this month. But I think for practical purposes, you do need to have a paved parking surface.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Any discussion? There being none, we will now vote on Article 14. The article passes 118 in favor, 6 opposed, no abstentions. We now skip ahead to Article 19.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 19 is to increase the funding available under the Senior Citizen Property Tax Work-Off Program. I brought this article to you at town meeting in order to provide some additional property tax assistance for the seniors in the community. Right now, the program has a funding limit established by town meeting at $100,000. That was done back in 2015. I'm proposing to increase it to $150,000. Basically, we have 150 program participants. If we increase it, basically, we would increase the earning credit on their tax bill up to $1,000. And how we do it in terms of how many hours would they work, well, we adjust that now annually to the minimum wage. So as the minimum wage increases up to $15 per hour, they would still get the $1,000 credit. We would just reduce the number of hours they would have to reach that milestone. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 19.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation.
The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommend approval of Article 19.
Time for discussion.
Hello, Sherman Horton, Precinct 6. I just had a question. Is this program fully subscribed?
Yes.
Okay.
Right now, because of the $100,000 limit, the maximum they can earn is roughly about $700. So now what we're trying to do is push that up to $1,000.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions or discussion? There being none, we will now vote on Article 19, which is to increase the Senior Citizen Property Tax Work-Off Abatement Program to $150,000.
For those of you who were here on Monday night, you might remember a statistic that a huge proportion of our town is at least 60 years old. And so this Senior Citizen Property Tax Work-Off Program has proven very popular. And it's good for the town, it's good for the individuals who might be on limited incomes to find a way to reduce their property tax burden by working for the town at this.
The article passes 125 in favor, no opposition, 1 abstention. We now skip ahead to Article 22.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 22 begins a series of community preservation articles. The chair, Linda Prescott, asked me to present these articles on behalf of the committee this evening. The first article is as customary on the community preservation article, is to address the existing projects that have previously been funded. Right now, the estimate for the upcoming fiscal years, we estimate that we'll collect $1.165 million in CPA surcharge. Unfortunately, the state revenue now is dismal at just around 12% or so at $195,000, $1.36 million. There is an effort at the legislature to, after not having modified the state's funding source since its inception to increase that in the year ahead. We'll see if that happens. But basically, we're budgeting $1.36 million. We have to provide, under this article, 10% to each of the program allocations: open space, historical, and community housing. And then we put the $200,000 into a budgeted reserve for future votes. Here's the debt service that we need to fund, totaling $704,393. You can see, again, these are all previously approved by the community, and the one that's probably most notable is the Town Hall project, which was the first major project. In fiscal year 21, a year from now, would be the final vote on that project. So you can see that would free up some capacity in the future. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 22.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommend Article 22.
Any questions or discussions on this? There being none, we will now vote on accepting the Community Preservations Plan for appropriating the numbers as set out in the warrant article.
These community preservation funds have become an instrumental way for towns like Chelmsford to preserve and rehabilitate important properties within their town. You might recall a few years ago, a couple of $1 million was invested to refurbish the Old Town Hall and also the North Chelmsford Town
The article
Hall.
passes unanimously,
Both of these buildings
122
have
in
proved to be
favor.
incredibly useful, and it was only
Okay,
with
Article
these community
23.
preservation funds.
Article 23 is
that we
a
were able to make
request
that
to
happen.
replenish the community preservation funds, recreation, and open space capital improvement funds. As you may recall, the Community Preservation Committee has established these funds to deal with small projects that come up during the course of the fiscal year, rather than bringing the minor requests to the community. So right now, they're seeking to restore those two funds, $50,000 each for recreational use and $50,000 for open space. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Finance Committee have a recommendation.
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 23.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval. Unanimously recommends approval.
Okay, thank you. Does any discussion or questions on this article? There appear to be none. So we will now vote on Article 23, which is to appropriate $100,000 from the Community Preservation Fund, General Fund, and $50,000 being used for recreation, $50,000 for open space. The article passes 124 in favor, 1 opposition, and no abstentions. Now we move on to Article 26.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is the final community preservation article, and it's the penultimate article for your consideration on the warrant. This article is a moderate-sized project, community preservation project. It's a request for $95,000 to basically transform the existing Varney Playground 2 tennis courts, which are in need of reconstruction, into 1 tennis court and 1 pickleball court. So many of you are familiar with the area of Varney. It's the area up here in the top with the blue, you show the tennis courts there in the illustration. This is more of a close-up of the area and what's sought to be done up there. The area now has 2 tennis courts. As you can see, the current condition is they're in tough shape and virtually difficult to play there because of the frost heaves and cracking and sealing that we receive in New England from the winter conditions. The proposed layout is to install a new pickleball court and a new tennis court. The pickleball court actually has a smaller footprint than a tennis court, so therefore the plan would then be to provide off-street parking, which would be very beneficial to that narrow roadway and benefit to the neighbors to not have the cars parked along the street. Again, the net project cost of the town is the $95,000. Public Works will perform some of the work to basically bring this to its completion by doing some of the excavation and so forth. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 26.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval of Article 26.
Time for questions.
Yeah, simply a question. You mentioned frost heaves.
Yeah.
Is something going to be done to address that issue?
Yes, basically when this will be taken up and then they'll put a sufficient base underneath it and then you then put the concrete on it. But again, just because of the fact we live in New England, they're always going to get, over time, over a 20, 25-year period, you're always going to get heaves as well as the spalding. So yes, the next generation after us will eventually, like we do all of our outdoor spaces, have to reconstruct the facility.
All right, Randy Leach, Precinct 7. My question is about the pickleball court. I don't know if anybody plays pickleball. I was recently talking to a pickleball expert, being my mother, who's visiting from Florida and plays pickleball. And one of the issues that they're having down in Cape Coral, Florida, specifically with pickleball, is the sounds of the players playing pickleball. And they're actually having noise complaints. So I don't know if we've consulted the neighbors of the Barney Park area with respect to having a pickleball court located there. And I'm being totally honest. In Cape Coral, Florida,
I'm sure you are.
There is an issue.
I just don't know what to say.
Okay, I'm just bringing up in a public forum that if I was to live in a house near the pickleball court, I would probably be complaining.
Mr. Manager?
So it's not really a question. It's
I guess the question is, because I'm sure I'm not alone, what is it about pickleball that would make it loud?
It's like playing ping pong with a large ball. You hear like a, but it's really loud. So it would be like tennis, except for tennis is silent compared to pickleball.
Okay.
Pickleball is like hitting a large ping pong ball.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that. You can consider yourself a pickleball expert then. Go ahead, Mr. Lefebvre.
Ken Lefebvre, 3 Moonbeam Ave. When this came in front of the Board of Selectmen, there were parking lots in the proposal. And I just want to make sure, I don't see them there, I don't see them in the wording in the article, that it does include the parking lots.
Yeah, it'll have off-street parking similar to what you see there, a few spaces off-road, yes.
Okay, and at one end of the tennis court, does it have a wooden wall for tennis, for people to play by themselves?
Yes.
All right, just want to make sure, because now it's public record.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions or comments? There being none, we will now vote on the appropriation of $95,000 from community preservation funds for 2 tennis courts and, 1 tennis court and a pickleball court on Varney Playground.
And as they're taking that vote, I can tell you that our team at Chelmsford Telemedia is trying to find some video of pickleball being played so we can ascertain the level of noise made by the players and the ball during that time.
I did say 10 o'clock.
A moment of levity here in what has been a largely serious and often, not tonight anyway, but on Monday night, a confrontational town meeting.
Article passes 123 in favor, 3 opposed, no abstentions, and now for the final article of the spring town meeting. Mr. Manager.
Yes, we're seeking town meeting to vote a street acceptance of the following 5 roadways: Alyssa Way, Fay Street, Galloway Road, Hall Road, and Mission Road. You may say, well, some of these roads have been around for some time, but as we explained, because we've been doing this now at regular town meeting intervals, the new subdivision roadway is Alyssa Way. That meets the planning board's subdivision standards. It's been approved. It's been signed off. The others have been the ongoing effort by the town to have these other roadways brought onto our accepted public way inventory in order that we can then receive the excise gas so that we can then get the funding from the state to maintain all of our roadways. So the DPW has gone out and done necessary steps in terms of recording the meets and bounds in all the areas to make this conform. And so we ask your vote this evening to add them to officially to our public street inventory to then submit to the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 27.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation.
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval of Article 27.
Any discussion, questions, debate? Apparently not. So we will now vote on Article 27, which is to accept the 5 roads and ways and streets that are mentioned in the article.
Score.
Pull your chair in. Pull his chair in.
The article passes 121 in favor and 1 abstention, no opposition. Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? All in favor? Anyone opposed?
I seriously doubt it. This is Kelly. I seriously doubt there would be anybody opposed at this point. We had, coming in tonight, we had 9 town meeting warrant articles to discuss, including 1 special town meeting. We knew going in that Article 10, the one having to do with the fast food restaurant zoning bylaw, would take some time, and indeed it did. This has been a long process for Route 29, sometimes painful. A couple of years ago when this was first proposed to sort of try to stem the tide of businesses leaving town, there was hope and expectation that just laying out the welcome mat would be enough to bring businesses in. That has not proven to be the case, as you heard from Lisa Maroney and Evan Belansky and others associated with the economic development team. So the next step, right now there is a tenant looking to redevelop 330 Billerica Road. That's the old Comcast building. And a linchpin in that is a restaurant that the developer wants to have a fast food option for that. It's sort of a deal maker or deal breaker, and that's what all of the debate was about tonight, that important first step in getting the redevelopment going. Sometimes it's not always a palatable step, but this is the kind of decision that's been invested in our planning board, which is an elected body, and at some level the town meeting representatives agreed you have to trust the planning board to do the right thing. After that, it was pretty smooth sailing. The remainder of the articles went through very quickly. And so we're out of here by 10 o'clock, which is, counting Monday night, a fairly rapid town meeting. Those of you who've been with us know that it has not been uncommon the last couple of years to go to 3 nights. We're grateful to be able to get out of here at a reasonable time and make way to our homes. So for the staff and volunteers of Chelmsford Telemedia, I, Kelly Beattie, thank you very much for watching us this evening. Don't forget you can always play this back along with all the other town meeting, the planning board, the board of selectmen, school committee, and so forth by going to our website, chelmsfordtv.org, and you can play those on demand along with all our other great programming. So until we see you in October, or maybe at the 4th of July, I wish you good night and have a safe and happy spring.